In what's being described as a major setback for the LGBTQ plus community, the Supreme Court ruled this week against a Colorado law that banned so-called conversion therapy for young people. Now, conversion therapy is the practice of therapists trying to change the gender identity or sexual orientation of LGBTQ minors. In other words, therapists trying to compel LGBTQ kids to be straight or cisgender. The case was brought by Kaylee Childs, a Christian therapist in Colorado, who argued that the state ban violated her First Amendment rights. In Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's lone dissenting opinion, she wrote that this ruling, quote, opens a dangerous can of worms. It threatens to impair states' ability to regulate the provision of medical care in any respect. It extends the Constitution into uncharted territory in an utterly irrational fashion, and it ultimately risks grave harm to Americans' health and well-being, end quote. Let me give you some statistics. According to the Trevor Project, which is an LGBTQ plus nonprofit suicide prevention organization, in 2023, there were more than 1,320 conversion therapy practitioners across 48 states and the District of Columbia. I can tell you that 15% of LGBTQ youth report being threatened with or subject to conversion therapy. The hardest statistic to hear is that according to the 2024 Trevor Project survey, 35% of those exposed to conversion therapy in the last year reported suicide attempts. What I cannot tell you is how it feels to be inside of one of those facilities. I cannot give you a true account of the lasting psychological harm of the discredited abuse. But Garrett Conley, the author of the 2016 award-winning memoir Boy Erased, can. I know many members of the Velshi Band Book Club will likely remember Conley and his story. Many people have told me how much Conley and his story have stayed with them. Certainly one of the books and conversations that stayed with me. Boy Erased centers on then 19-year-old Conley's stay at a conversion therapy center named Love in Action. Conley shared the mechanisms of this therapy, the relentless psychological torture, the shame, the forced self-hatred, the isolation. Conley utilizes flashbacks to describe the moments that led up to his treatment, his religious upbringing as the sole child of devout missionary Baptists, how he grappled with his sexuality in secret for so many years, and how he was brutally outed to his parents by the very person who raped and assaulted him. What people comment on most from my first conversation with Conley is not the shocking treatment or inside of the conversion facility. It's Conley's remarkable capacity for forgiveness and for love, including for his parents, and for his clear-headed understanding of what exactly conversion therapy is and for the way he's been able to welcome spirituality back into his life. Quote, Love in Action was telling me on a daily basis that a loss of self meant a gain in virtue. And a gain in virtue meant I was drawing closer to God and therefore closer to my true heavenly self. You became all-telling with no showing. Not the extraordinary extra, but the stock player in a harp and halo bit. I came to therapy thinking that my sexuality didn't matter, but it turned out that every part of my personality was intimately connected. Cutting one piece damaged the rest. I had prayed for purification, but the minute I felt its icy baptismal waters burning away everything I'd ever loved, I began to open myself up instead to a former possibility. Unconditional love, the original flame that had drawn me closer to God and my family and the rest of the world, end quote. And what Conley says of the Supreme Court ruling and this uncertain future for real people like him so many years after he experienced this for himself is, quote, regardless of the Supreme Court's decision, freedom of religion and free speech are being used as a shield for a shadow industry that thrives on the slow disintegration of the soul. The branding may change from a cure to a calling, but the result is the same. A generation of LGBTQ youth being taught that the way God created them is a trauma to be healed rather than a life to be celebrated. The Bible says that all people are created in God's image, and as we have both come to realize, true healing and freedom are found in being who we were divinely created to be, end quote. Garrett Conley is standing by. He joins me right after a commercial break. All right, today's meeting of the Velshi Band Book Club is officially underway. I'm joined by the longtime friend of the book club, Gerard Connolly. Connolly first joined us in 2022 to discuss his award-winning 2016 memoir, Boy Erased, and then again to discuss institutional brainwashing in George Orwell's novel 1984. He's also the author of All the World Beside. And today we're revisiting Boy Erased, a work of literature that has alarming new relevance with the Supreme Court's conversion therapy ruling this week. Gerard, good to see you. Thank you for being with us, my friend.
Thank you so much. It's good to be with you again.
I immediately thought about you when this ruling occurred because I can talk about it intellectually, but you don't have to talk about it intellectually. You experience this. And I'll get in a moment to sort of forgiveness and faith and how you got to that. But just tell me what, for my viewer who doesn't really get it, because conversion therapy is one of those words that sounds really innocuous and not that serious. What is this?
It's any attempt to force a person to believe that who they believe they are is wrong. So I think it operates on the idea of a single story rather than science, right? So we know that LGBTQ people exist. Science knows this. Every major medical organization knows this. But anyone who takes someone into a therapy practice and says there's only one way to live, and this is the way you must do it, that's what conversion therapy is.
Do the people who engage in this, is it ideological? Is it religious? Do they feel like they're performing a service and helping you? Tell me a bit about this.
Well, I mean, many of the people who ran Love in Action, where I attended in Memphis in 2004, they were themselves gay and later came out and said none of this worked. So many of these people were victims of an ideology. Many of them started from a church that said you can't be who you are. God doesn't love you this way. And I think it started, out of a good place in San Rafael, California. There was a group of people, gay men, who were meeting to discuss what the Bible really said about queer people. And then slowly, as we brought in a lot of fake medical evidence, and conferences and money was starting to be made, I believe it morphed into this thing that was very, very harmful.
Religion and faith play a part in these things. And in your case, you were a person of faith. So that creates an inherent conflict, right? There's already a conflict about the fact that you're not supposed to be gay. And then there's this added conflict about the fact that God doesn't intend for you to be gay.
Yeah. And, we talked about 1984 not too long ago, this idea that, love is hate, changing the words around. I actually read the Bible pretty extensively. My father's a Baptist preacher, and the words in red, Jesus's words, are about compassion and love. And so in many of my therapy sessions, I did one-on-one therapy sessions as well. I was basically told to hate my father in order to cure myself. I was told that my parents had failed me, that I needed to use hate as a temporary tool. And none of this aligned with what I understood about Christ when I was growing up. I had eyes to see what the text actually said. And so, I understand this free speech debate that people are having, but I think whenever you're a licensed professional in a setting where someone has come to you out of trust, someone who believes that you're more educated on the subject than they are, that you have a duty to walk people through options for their lives, not just tell them that there's only one option.
This is an important point. Ketanji Brown Jackson actually wrote this in her dissent. She said, ultimately, because the majority plays with fire in this case, I fear that the people of this country will get burned. Before now, licensed medical professionals had to adhere to standards when treating patients. They could neither do nor say whatever they want. Today, the court turns its back on that tradition. And to be completely frank, no one knows what will happen now. Certainly not the majority. It appears to have made this momentous decision without adequately grappling with the potential long-term and disastrous implications of this ruling, end quote. And she's making the point that you just made, that there's an understanding of what a licensed medical professional is meant to do in society, and we are using an interpretation of free speech to fundamentally shift that understanding.
Yeah, I think it's a dangerous idea, right? So, if I go to a doctor, I don't want them to tell me that I can cure my illness by going out and slaughtering a goat, for example. I know that's an extreme example, but it does open the door for these sorts of quack medicine ideas. But I think what's even more damaging for the LGBTQ community is this idea that we're a subject to be debated, that our very existence is something that can be argued over and is open for interpretation based on free speech, which every major medical organization in the country knows that LGBTQ people exist. So this feels like an attack. And ironically, it's so strange to be here 10 years later, still talking about this, when people came up to me all the time saying, isn't that a thing of the past? Doesn't that not exist anymore? And I was so grateful for the statistics you put up there, because people don't always know that there are over 1,000 practitioners in this country and that people are being harmed. This is an issue of harm, right? And for a lot of people who are worried about protecting children, which I understand, right? This has been my job for the past 10 years. I've been involved in a lot of this legislation. I am just as concerned about protecting children. Are those conversations complex? Yes, right? But we need to have those conversations and not close the door and say, there's only one way to fix you.
Well, one of the great things about your writing is that it embraces the complexity of it. There's no one suggesting this is easy, and there's no part of it. And I have to say, we don't have time today, but one of the most interesting parts about your book is how you work through that with your faith and your family and the remarkable love that prevails throughout the entire story. So again, I'm glad to have you back here, my friend. Thank you for being with us. Longtime member of the Velshi Band Book Club, Garrett Conley, author of Boy Erased and All the World Beside. As a reminder to anyone who's watching right now who might be struggling with mental health, there is help available. Call or text 988 anytime, 24/7, or visit 988lifeline.org.